studios in New York City. This is Charlie Rose.
Only 5 weeks before the transition of power in Iraq, things on the ground still seem very uncertain. In a major policy speech last night, President Bush outlined a 5-point plan to hand over authority to an interim Iraqi government. Today in the city of Najaf and Kufa, clashes continued between the coalition forces and militiamen loyal to Muqtada al-Sadr. At least 13 people were killed. Joining me now, retired General Anthony Zinni and Tom Clancy, the novelist. They have collaborated on a new book called Battle Ready, examining Zinni's military career. Zinni has been one of the early critics of the war in Iraq and remains highly regarded in the military. As Chief of Central Command from 1997 to 2000, he commanded all U.S. military forces in the Middle East. He served as a special Middle East envoy from 2002 to 2003. I am pleased to have both of them here.
Thank you, Charlie.
And pleased to know about this association. I mean, how did this come about?
Well, I was contacted and found that Tom was interested in the fourth book in the series,
right.
the Commander series. I was flattered, of course, humbled by it. It's been a long and great experience and effort. And through the course of time, I think we've become pretty good friends.
Why are you doing this series? I mean, and how do you choose the people? And what is it that you hope to accomplish?
Nobody knows, the general public doesn't know anything about general officers. The senior commanders we have out there leading and commanding our kids in uniform. And the people have a right to know what kind of people they are. And guess what? They're pretty smart. They study their profession as carefully as a professor of surgery at Johns Hopkins does. And they really do care about the kids under their command. I mean, these guys get weepy about the kids under their command.
Sure.
In the movies, they're all drunken Nazis, but they're not like that.
They really are people devoted. Not only that, I think, I mean, and you can talk about this. I don't know of any other institution in America, that does more in terms of engaging in management training kind of things, in terms of constant evaluation of the skills of the people as they make their way up.
Right.
How about that?
I think that's true. It is a very competitive, higher upper out system. I think you have to know your people very well. You're responsible for taking them into harm's way. You can't succeed unless you view your subordinates as your sons and daughters. I don't think there's any way. You have to truly love leadership, and you have to truly love those that you lead. You know, the day I was wounded in Vietnam as a company commander on some isolated hill, and this was 1970. The war wasn't that popular anymore, and none of the troops thought they would be coming home to parades or anything. And that day I watched my company take a hill. Tremendous sacrifice, and I watched the heroism all around me as I lay there, and I couldn't get over it. And at my time in the hospital, I thought about that. What made these men do what they did? They did it for each other. They did it for the Corps, the esprit that was instilled in them, and it gave me a great deal of respect, and it gave me a great understanding as to why I was in the military and why I couldn't leave until they threw me out.
Where do you stand on the Iraqi war, both the
I would have felt better if we had a casus belli.
The taking, the post-fall of the statue.
We didn't have a casus belli going in, and that was disturbing to me.
Well, they announced they had one. 3 or 4.
Not in classical terms. I mean, a casus belli means this guy is a threat to our national security, to our vital national interests, or to American lives. And I just didn't see that was the case. And we had Afghanistan happening, and Osama bin Laden is a fellow who needs to meet God sooner or later, preferably with a U.S. bullet in his head. And that was a more pressing matter to me at that time. But, the president is the commander-in-chief, and when he says go, they go. And now their troops are deployed, they're in the field, they're in danger, and we have to support them.
You think they were looking to go to war with Iraq?
I have no way of knowing that.
That this was a war of choice, not necessity, of course.
I have no way of knowing.
Yeah. You say it's the wrong war,
right,
at the wrong time,
right,
with the wrong strategy.
Right. Exactly. First of all, the priority was, as Tom pointed out, Al-Qaeda and the extremists. That's who blew up the towers. That's who attacked us. And we had business to take care of in Afghanistan and in now the territories of Pakistan. And we had a country, Afghanistan, that needed to be righted, that can't revert back to becoming a sanctuary. That was going to be a full-time effort. That's where our focus should have been. This was elective surgery in my mind. Saddam was contained. I don't object to military action against Saddam, but do it when you finish the more important business, and do it in the right way. You do it by getting international support, going to the UN, wading through whatever process they need. Don't create a rationale for war that's misleading, as we did with WMD and Association for Terrorism, which we are still huckstering out there. And if you're going to go in, understand what we've known since the first Gulf War, when President Bush 41 did not go to Baghdad for good reason. It would have violated the UN resolution, would have broken the coalition, and we would have inherited Iraq and all its problems, as you can see now. When the decision was made to go, I fault the Pentagon for not fully making sure the president was aware of what we were getting into. This strategy was not going to change the Middle East overnight. We were not going to be welcomed with open arms. We needed an organization on the ground to rebuild the country from scratch. It wasn't reconstruction, it was construction. Right. And we lacked all of that. In addition to that, effective planning and the other component parts that are necessary when you go into a military operation, the political reconstruction, the economic reconstruction, the social reconstruction, we weren't prepared for that.
Did they understand that? Did Rumsfeld understand it? Did Cheney understand it? Did Wolfowitz understand it? Did Doug Feitman? Oh, some of these people are neoconservatives, that word that you don't like.
These are smart people. They had voices, not just my voice. They had the former commanders of the U.S. Central Command. They had generals like General Clark, General McCaffrey. They had generals like Brent Scowcroft and others
who were raising questions, people who were experienced from the Gulf War of '91.
Yeah, Brzezinski, others. I mean, not only military people, but diplomats, people that are experienced in the region and in foreign policy. Enough voices just trying to bring up the concerns and voice the problems that they might face. These were pushed away.
Well, what does that mean, pushed away? I mean, Rumsfeld would listen to someone and dismiss their arguments?
I think the assumptions they used, that quote, this would be a piece of cake, we would be welcomed with open arms.
Who said that?
Well, I mean...
Are you saying that was a prevailing idea, or did Cheney say that, or Rumsfeld say this is a... Well, Ken Edelman is not a...
But this was the prevailing belief. And I think the planning was lacking. I mean, we constructed the Coalition Provisional Authority on the fly after the military operation. We went in with General Gardner with a handful of people, no plan, and he gets replaced by Bremer. They were still trying to man the positions at the CPA while the fighting had ended, and we needed to get on with reconstruction. There was a lag. We went in with insufficient forces, not for the military defeat of the Republican Guard, but to seize and freeze the security situation, to prevent revenge killing, to prevent criminality on the street.
But I just want to stay with this aspect.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of how much were these ideas presented for debate and discussion, or simply did they believe they had the right answer and therefore did not want to hear a contrary voice? I mean, we're talking about, as you said, intelligent people, who care about the country, want to do the right thing, but have an ideology.
Yeah. I believe the latter. I believe that this was all knowable. This wasn't some... I mean,
so they didn't want to hear it because it got in the way of what they wanted to do, regardless of the facts?
And what you're hearing now from the Pentagon is, well, we're surprised at this. I mean, that's exactly the term the Secretary of Defense used. We're surprised at this.
At the resistance?
At the resistance, at the complexity of the problems, at the depth of the problems. I heard one of our cabinet members say...
At the number of casualties?
Number of casualties. That we were surprised at the institutions collapse. You're going to go into a country that's been under sanctions for over a decade. You're going to go into a country that is controlled by an authoritarian figure from top to bottom. You're going to uproot and pull that out. Then you're going to make a decision to de-Ba'athify down to the lowest level. And you're going to be surprised that the institutions collapse? I mean, how could you be... Logic would tell you...
30 years he's been in power.
30 years and his hands in everything, and complete fear. He, over 50% of the paychecks he paid directly, and most of the rest indirectly. 80% of the food he controlled its distribution. When you get rid of him and his institution and de-Ba'athify down to that level and take down and disband the army, and then you're surprised at the institutional collapse?
And are you surprised that you have no forces to take care of the resistance that developed?
That's right. I mean, for years we have sent messages to the Iraqi army, the regular army, that if the time comes and you don't fight, we'll take care of you.
We sent messages by making sure that it was communicated to them, and they got it.
Well,
and do you think that's in fact what happened at when they toppled Saddam? That these officers who got that word realized that?
I think many of them,
that there was no resistance.
I think many of them fully believed that they would be recalled that obviously leadership would be removed and the senior leadership would have to be vetted to ensure there was no blood on their hands. But the units believed they would stay intact and they would be used for the security purposes.
I've had people come on this program and tell me that the military has been raising these questions across the board. That is the civilian command, the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, Deputy Secretary, and others, you know, who have resisted. Now, if you talk to the people, the civilians at the Pentagon, they say, look, we listen to them all the time. Tell me an example in which the military has recommended something we didn't do other than General Shinseki.
Well, I mean, the plan that was in place was dismissed by the Secretary of Defense as, quote, old and stale.
He said it came from 91, I think. It
came from 2000. It was updated every 2 years.
Right. This is when the president said, you have a plan to go to war. This is Bob Woodward writes about this.
Right.
Do you have a plan? General Frank goes out and says, yeah, we got a plan, but it needs to be updated.
Well, it's updated every 2 years. So the last year the update was 2000 under my time. But it had significantly more forces. Not only that, it had pieces in it that dealt with the aftermath, because I was deathly afraid that if we went in and did this, we would be stuck with the reconstruction, we the military. I didn't have faith and trust that the interagency, that State Department, that Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance, that those that would come in to reconstruct economies and political systems would be there on the ground. And so I wanted to at least do the planning if we had to take that over in the military, be responsible for it. I didn't want that mission. I actually created a second plan called Desert Crossing for that purpose, which was in the works as I left command, because I said we are going to be stuck with this baby, not just the military defeat of the organized resistance, the soldiers and the military units, but we're going to be stuck with this baby and bringing it back to life.
Why didn't they listen?
You know, I don't know. I wasn't there. I certainly wasn't the commander.
Okay, but I mean, why didn't they listen when you had? I mean, what is the lesson to be learned here?
Well, the lesson to be learned, I think, is first of all, you have to realize that this is the most important decision that any leader makes, to go to war. It should be totally a last resort. And if you decide it's necessary, for all the reasons Tom pointed out as to what it threatens in our national interests and our survival, then understand what you're getting into. What is going to be the cost and the price? What do we need to do on the battlefield? What are the strategic, operational, tactical objectives here that we need to accomplish? What kind of organization do we need on the ground? You know, defeat of an enemy armed force no longer marks victory. I think since the end of the Cold War, we have found that we fight strange enemies. They're not necessarily related to nation states. They're amorphous. And the military action to defeat them or kill them or break their equipment isn't enough. We find ourselves more and more having to reconstruct societies. We tried it in Somalia and Haiti and Bosnia. And we've had experience, 10 years of experience, to know this is an issue and that national construction and reconstruction is a big deal. We were now going to do it in a country that has never known democracy, never known free market economy, never had a voice in their own governance, has been under a dictator of one form or another since its existence.
Okay, but that's a good point. So what was our option? I mean, people are now saying, look, the mistake was to think that we could engage in nation building, that we could somehow bring in and give them a democracy, and they would say, thank you very much for doing that, that they had to create their own democracy. And there are those who now will look at what the president said last night and say, well, the president is doing the right thing now. He's saying it's up to the Iraqis. We have overturned Saddam. It's up for them now to build their own country. And perhaps when we leave in terms of handing over sovereignty, not the military, that the Iraqis will rise to the occasion. Do you think that has a possibility in terms of creating stability and creating a structure that can keep the country together, give it a democracy so it can get on its feet?
It certainly has a possibility, but it isn't something that's going to happen in the short term or is going to happen easily without a lot of resources and a lot of pain. There isn't some sort of natural tendency for people that have never experienced democracy to suddenly walk out in the streets and adopt it. There is not an educated electorate that even understands this. There is not political parties that are transparent and been developed that are credible yet. There's not even some sort of constitution or form of government. Is this a federation, confederation? In 5 weeks, we are hoping that Brahimi will find the right mix of people that are acceptable on the street. They will take over this government. In about 6 months, they're going to go to the polls and elect what? Whatever the mullah tells them at Friday prayers to vote for. Is there going to be resistance? Can it survive? Will the security situation allow it to evolve and develop? Are we going to be responsible for that? I mean, what I heard last night was what I should hear from a president, and I think the president clearly laid out the strategic goals. But there has to be, with each of those goals, a detailed plan.
How do you get there?
To get there. It's not his job to do that. I disagree with those that say the president ought to be more specific. That's not the job of the president. He lays out the strategic goals. Others give him the strategy and the plans to get there. And they've let him down, in my view, unfortunately. But look at what we have. We have a UN resolution we're trying to get through. If we get that, we're hoping countries will sign up and share the burden. What happens if we don't get it? Or what happens if we get it fine and they don't sign up? We have Brahimi out there trying in 5 weeks to get some sort of interim structure acceptable. What happens if it doesn't occur?
And you already have conflicts between the Kurds and the Shia and the Sunni in terms of who is Brahimi.
This is not it's not a homogeneous society. Beside the three major factions, there are many others that are at odds with each other. So you have the compounded difficulty of this not being a natural fit. This isn't Japan and Germany where there's some sort of homogeneous kind of society that you can reestablish. And to add to that, we've got outsiders that have flown in to try to add to the mix and cause problems. The jihadis that are coming in, the criminals in the street, mixing with the local militias that everybody seems to want to have for one reason or another. It is a bad, dangerous mix. It isn't going to be easy to deal with.
Okay, a couple of questions before I come back to Tom. In your judgment, this war was not worth it.
This war was the wrong war at the wrong time. This war should not have been, there was no reason or rationale to take this war on, certainly not now. We should have dealt with our bigger problem, and that's dealing with al-Qaeda and extremists and terrorists and the reform in the Middle East that needed to take place to solve some of those problems. Saddam was fully contained. That containment could have worked as long as we wanted it to do, to be effective. It was actually on the cheap in many respects. And to me, to throw this on the plate, if I turn on a news channel today, how much of that news is dedicated to fighting al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, the Taliban, the reconstruction of Afghanistan, and how much is dedicated to Iraq?
Most of it's dedicated to Iraq, very little about Osama.
And that ought to tell you where Osama's the one that blew up the towers in this city.
Right.
And that's who we should be fighting. That's our enemy right now. This guy could have waited. He was a tin-horn dictator that we had fully contained.
You have pointed the finger clearly at the people in the Pentagon who have, in your judgment, civilians especially, have made decisions and taken the country to war.
Exactly.
And that they should resign or be fired.
Yes.
One or the other.
Yes. And that's first, let me say that's the president's decision.
Obviously.
But obviously, I think that kind of accountability is necessary.
Rumsfeld should be fired or quit.
He's in charge of the Pentagon.
Should be fired or quit.
Yeah. Yes.
Paul Wolfowitz should be fired or quit.
Yes.
Doug Feith should be fired or quit.
Yes.
How about the vice president?
No, I think.
Where does it stop?
Well, I think the issue is who's responsible. The Pentagon has taken on the responsibility for this mission.
People who are responsible are the people who make the decision. Now, you can argue the following, I think, is that that's for the American people to choose in the next election, in terms as they evaluate how they think the stewardship of the country has been handled.
But I think one of the obligations of the Pentagon is to the president, certainly.
Right.
The president is not the one who should be developing plans and strategies. We expect the president of the United States to lay out the goals, to give the direction, to give the mission. We expect others to provide to him the information, the analysis, the planning once they get the direction. If they let him down, look, none of us would argue. I would have counseled to the president, don't go after Saddam now. And if you have to go after him, go through the UN. But if the president made the decision that he had to go in this way, based on the information he had, then if it failed, who gave him the information that led him to make that decision? If it failed because the planning was lacking, because the actions and decisions on the ground were found wanting, who was responsible for that to the president? That's the first order of business that I think we have to deal with now. We find ourselves in a situation, just look at the polls, and this is not a political issue with me. I don't endorse anybody. I'm a Republican, registered Republican. I supported this administration. I was part of it.
You
I certainly did not want.
now?
Do I what?
Do you support the president now?
I would not be able to support an administration that would keep this Pentagon civilian leadership in place. You know, that would be a problem for me.
His accountability is to fire the people who gave him bad advice.
That's exactly
his
right.
responsibility.
That's what
in
I
your
did.
judgment.
Yeah, to hold them accountable.
And if he did that, then
Certainly.
If he did that,
I could support him.
you could support him.
Yes.
Because you believe in other qualities this president has.
And I believe in other qualities within the administration, like in the State Department, and Colin Powell, and Rich Armitage, and people that I've worked for, I've seen, and I've respected.
None of us sitting here at this table, and Tom has taught me this, none of us sitting here at this table, any other table, know necessarily how decisions are made. I wonder, and books will be written about this, and I assume that Colin Powell will write his own book, and Rich Armitage, I doubt, will write his book. No, Rich, he's unlikely to write a book about his experiences, but he may talk in terms of interviews. Do you think they may regret now not having protested enough, not having made the case stronger, because their voices were heard as people thinking we were on the wrong track?
Well, first, I don't know. I don't know what they did, and I don't know how strongly they protested, and I don't know how they felt. So I would not ever want to speak for them. That would certainly be out of place for me.
But you know them.
I know them.
These are people that wanted you to go to the Middle East.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was Colin Powell that said,
Yes.
Zinni is the man.
Yes. Yes, and regrettably, I failed in my mission. I think...
You failed in the mission in what way?
Well, I think Secretary Powell laid out a path to peace that I think was viable. He convinced the President of the United States to go to the UN and make the case for a Palestinian state. Never happened before. He provided a path where both sides could see the outcome and could see every step in the path. My job there was to put them both on the path. Unfortunately, I was able to get Ariel Sharon and the Israelis to take the step onto the path. I was not able to get Yasser Arafat. He would not take the step, regrettably. And that was my job.
That's another issue which I want to come to just for a second because you're there. Because we still have that issue right there. I mean, whatever is happening out there because of Gaza and the withdrawal from Gaza and the political problems that Ariel Sharon has now, you still have Arafat still exercising power and still not knowing whether he is a bargaining power partner that can contribute to a settlement of the issues that separate the Palestinians. Yeah. Why do you think, after all your experience there, he's not willing to take that step?
Well, first of all, I think his legacy is more important to him, and he doesn't want to be seen as a compromiser. I think he, and I've had this conversation with him, he looks at people like with him, Sadat and Rabin and King Hussein and others that have taken a risk for peace and either paid for it with their lives or paid with it, like, say, Barack did with his political career in ruins. And he wants to go out, and I quote him, as he's the only undefeated Arab general. He put his finger in my face and said that. He said, I'm a general like you. I'm the only undefeated Arab general. And that's more important to him. Where my heart breaks in this process for the Palestinian people is they have two bad choices. Yasser Arafat and the Palestinian Authority on one side and Hamas on the other side. They need a third option. I had a lot of hope that Abu Mazen, when he stood up and confronted Arafat and the potential for him to be the prime minister and to take the lead on the negotiations, and now Abu Allah, we just can't seem to build the credibility and empower these people to represent the Palestinians with a third option.
Do you think the United States and the Israelis have done enough to give them all that they needed? That's a problem.
No. Abu Mazen should have been able to go to Ariel Sharon and win some concessions on prisoner releases or other things to show he wasn't a lackey as his enemies on Hamas and Palestinian Authority were charging. When he came here to the Oval Office, he needed more than a photo op.
So then why didn't the President of the United States in those circumstances lean on the country that we have the most respect for in the Middle East, you know, the democracy in the Middle East, and say...
I don't even think it was a matter of the president have to lean on. I think both the Israelis and the United States...
exercise any power to
I don't know.
To make those kind of decisions that you think were necessary on the
It
part
was
of the
after my time. I watched this. I was impressed with Abu Mazen standing up to Arafat. I was impressed with Mohammed Dahlan, the security chief, saying, I'm going to try to wrestle the security forces away and consolidate them. At that moment that they stood there, at that moment I saw Abu Mazen at Aqaba standing with King Abdullah and with the president and Ariel Sharon. I said, there's a danger here, but there's a great opportunity. The danger is, in that photo op, he will be attacked as a lackey. He will be seen as a puppet, and that'll be the charge. What has to happen as a next step now that image is out there to dispel this is he's got to come home with some bacon. He's got to come home with some from the Israelis, and it's in their interest to do it. He's got to come with something from us to show that he can bring something to the Palestinian people that neither Hamas or Arafat can deliver, and that he can put them on a path to peace. He had nothing. He didn't win any concessions. He didn't get into any hard negotiations where he was able to win
nothing he could
something.
take to the Palestinian people and say, look what I'm doing for you, and therefore I'm a better force to represent you than the Hamas.
I think he should have come with a commitment of USAID projects, of schools, of clinics. He should have been able to get into some serious negotiations and walk away with maybe increased prisoner release.
I mean, that's easy, isn't it?
Would seem to me.
Those kind of projects. I mean, that doesn't cost anything that we don't
In
have
his
in abundance.
In his name, without the Palestinian Authority touching any of the funding or any of the projects, in the name of whoever stood up to Arafat and offered an alternative to Hamas. And I would have then pressured the other Arab leaders to say, this is the guy. You need to support him. You need to match what we're doing. Look, the Egyptians helped us push Abu Mazen into a position of authority. They worked hard to enable him to confront Arafat and to succeed in becoming the prime minister. We missed a golden opportunity there. We now have Abu Allah that's sort of standing back but in the same position. And unless they're empowered, they'll never be able to wrestle away control from the Palestinian Authority and the extremists like Hamas and Jihad and others. And the poor Palestinian people are trapped into this dilemma that they have only these two choices. And I think that it's going to require the United States, the so-called quartet, the UN, the EU, the Russians, the Israelis, all of us working together to try to make sure we empower that third option for the Palestinian people. First of all, it's in the interest of peace. It's what can lead towards some sort of negotiated peace. The alternative, which I see unfolding now, if my guess is right, is we're going to impose a solution. That we've given up negotiating our way to a solution and that there's going to be an imposition of a solution. It's not clear to me how this is going to turn out, where the borders are going to be drawn.
I mean, the idea is that there's been no negotiation between Palestinians and Israelis that led to a solution. It would be, in fact, that the Israelis say, they build a fence and say, we're withdrawing, we'll take.
Yeah, you can have these settlements, we'll take these. This is how Jerusalem's going to stand. This is how the water will work. This is the right of return situation. It's a fact on the ground. Here's your state, and there it is. Can that work? I don't know in the long run, but to me, it's always better if everybody feels that they came to a solution through negotiations and mediation.
Let me ask you this, and I'll ask Tom this rather than you. You're now in an academic position, essentially, aren't you?
Yes.
With that kind of, what led you to write a book about him, with him?
Yep.
With the kind of passion for America, the intelligence that he has, why isn't this country taking advantage of that?
Charlie.
See, I'm naive, so he always has to give me a lesson.
Why does Washington so rarely do smart things?
I don't know. Tell me.
Because we elect idiots.
Let me say something I think is very important. I'm not seeking any position in Washington.
I know that.
It's not my motivation at all.
I didn't suggest that at all. I'm just saying that you're passionate about the country and you have an experience. You know, I mean, we are in trouble now, in a variety of places, are we not? I mean, because decisions are made that may not have had the full weight of a vigorous debate. Part of what you just said is that they did not consider things with respect to Iraq, or if they were, no one. I mean, I know of no one. Of all the people I sit here every night interviewing, comes to me and says, I was there when they talked about this. There seemed to be not that kind of discussion. Bob Woodward's book says, essentially, the president never asked Don Rumsfeld, should we do this? Now, he says, the president does, I knew what he thought. I don't think that's enough, is it? To assume what Zinni thinks rather than hearing it from Zinni? To assume what Rumsfeld thinks? I mean, isn't that part of what's necessary at a time like this, when the world is as complex as it is, and the problems in the Middle East or in the Gulf are as insoluble as they seem to be?
Well, one thing I said at a point, someone asked me a question about the intelligence that was provided, that we need to find out what the intelligence community said, what they presented. I said, no, that's only half the problem. We have to know what the questions were that were asked of the intelligence community. If I asked you to come to me and give me the justification for war, you're going to give me one answer. If I come to you and say, is there a justification for war? Is there a case for a threat to the United States? You might come with a different answer. There's a subtle difference in that, in the way you pose that question to the intelligence community and to those that analyze the intelligence. What is this war truly going to cost me?
And what you expect, though, is that you hope. I mean, look. I mean, to give the president credit, at least on one instance that Bob Woodward pointed out, they come in. I think it was McLaughlin and Tennant come in to make the case, and the president says to him, "This is not going to play. Right. Is this all you've got?" Mm-hmm. I mean, there should have been a lot of that. It seems to me.
Yes. Yeah.
And George Tenet says he was an intelligent man. It's a slam dunk, Mr. President.
George Tenet also said in his Georgetown speech, we never said the threat was imminent. We never said the threat was imminent. Now, there were people in this administration that said it was imminent, Vice President for one. But he said we never said it was imminent. Well, what does that mean? If the threat is not imminent, that means you have time, you have other options, that you need to define the threat, its true capability to damage our interests, our very survival. To me, how did we get into a situation when a preemptive strike and rush to war without an imminent threat? Now, we can parse words and say, well, it wasn't quite imminent yet, but it was grave and gathering. Well, come on, what was it? What was the threat to the United States of America? What was the threat to our people and our property and our interests? I mean, what could he deliver? It was ridiculous, some of these allegations about unmanned aerial vehicles and missiles.
Why didn't somebody say that?
It was known.
I did.
You did. Where? You said it in public.
The only time I've been in the White House under the current administration, I got invited in for lunch with senior administration official. We were there in the White House mess, and he says, "Well, what if they?"
Who are we talking about, Tom? I mean,
I can't reveal it. He says, "What if they send the merchant ship from, I guess, from Basra all around the world to the Pacific coast, and they launch a UAV and sprinkle germ warfare on us?" And I'm thinking, how are they going to get past, was it 5th Fleet in the IO, then 7th Fleet, get all the way to San Francisco and drop Ebola on us? I don't think so. I just don't think, is it theoretically possible? Yeah, it's theoretically possible the Martians could land in Colorado.
But not likely.
But I don't see it happening.
So you were saying to him on that one instance.
I just said,
what did you say? You just said.
I said exactly what I said. I said, "Oh, come on! It's not a credible threat."
Do you believe they believed? Everybody says this is part of the conventional wisdom now. The first response is always President Clinton believed, President Chirac believed, everybody believed that there were weapons of mass destruction. Now they made they had different analysis of whether it was nuclear or whether it was chemical or whether it was biological. But they believed that he had weapons of mass destruction.
What happened?
We knew he had GB and VX.
Yeah. Well, so they believed that. Now that's faulty intelligence to maybe not to know more, because they had his son-in-law came out and said he destroyed all of them.
But here's what happened.
In 95.
The inspectors, their job was twofold. Was to ensure compliance with the UN resolution and to ensure that Saddam wasn't developing or retaining a capability to restart a program. They could not find accountability for all the weapons he had. We had to assume, when I was a commander of CENTCOM, that what was not accounted for, he still had. We didn't see any evidence of it. We couldn't find it. The inspectors were trying to root it out toward the end of the 90s, but you had to assume those artillery shells, those rocket rounds, still existed somewhere. Now, no one knew for sure. When, in 1998, Richard Butler finally threw up his hands and came out, and the president said, and we had a long-standing plan that if Butler was thrown out, we would strike.
But Butler's always been a hardliner that Saddam had it, he has it, and he's hiding. He had it, he's hiding.
Well, you had to believe that if he wasn't accountable, and we had to take that. You had to worst case it. So the president turns to me as a commander of CENTCOM and says, okay, what can we do military to take out his weapons of mass destruction programs in the book? And I said, well, we don't know what he has or where he has it or what it is. We're assuming what he didn't account for he might still have. The best we can do in Desert Fox in 1998, we can take out things that contribute to a weapons program. For example, he was authorized to have the Al Samud missile program, right. 150-kilometer range. Well, we could take out that missile production facility. He had a program of liquid fuel development. We could take that out. We can take out some high-tolerance equipment he would need to build centrifuges and do other things. We can take out the Special Republican Guards, who was his traditional security force for these sorts of things. Dual-use facilities.
How would we take them out?
Bomb and missiles is what we did. 4
Cruise
days
missiles and whatever.
Yeah, and so we can set back for lack of a better term, these attendant parts to a program that he would need. Now, let me tell you what I believe Saddam was up to. I believe Saddam thought that he demanded that if you don't catch me with a smoking gun, meaning the actual weapon of mass destruction in my possession, you have to give me a clean bill of health. That was his argument to the inspectors. The inspectors said, no, we can't give you a clean bill of health until you account for everything you had, plus that we're assured you don't have a framework of a program that you can restart. That's what I believe he had. That's
a framework of a program that he could restart.
Yes, he has scientists that still have their material.
He has know-how.
Yeah, he has dual-use facilities, pharmaceutical plants, pesticide plants that can be turned over. He has a missile program that he's working the edges of in terms of range that and experimenting with it easily. Once he's off the hook, he can start doing like the Iranians do with their missile system, where they're up to the 4th generation working on it to get greater ranges.
No doubt in your mind that they are trying to develop a nuclear capability.
The Iranians?
Yes.
Oh, no doubt in my mind, yeah. You know, but I think Saddam was trying to say, don't poke around what I can restart. Your job is to only find it on the ground. But the inspectors said, no, that's not the letter of the law. Account for everything and let us talk to who we need to talk to in a safe environment to prove you are not geared up to start a program, even though you don't have the material now that you could generate.
So you were saying Hans Blix was doing his job?
He was doing his job. So was Richard Butler, Rolf Fakeus.
Right.
Mohammed al-Baradei. You know.
Right. So they're all doing their job, and we should have, and they had higher standards than Saddam wanted them to have.
Absolutely.
And then we should have given them the opportunity.
And first of all,
we should have given them the opportunity to do the job.
Yeah.
So this is what the French wanted America to do.
And you have to understand, they don't come out with a decision. They make a report to the Security Council that we sit on, the Brits sit on. They don't come out and say Saddam's got a clean bill of health. They present their findings to the Security Council. The Security Council makes the ultimate decision to give him a clean bill of health or not. We can veto it. The Brits can veto it. In addition to that, there are Americans on these inspection teams. You know, I mean, one of the complaints Saddam had about the inspection teams in the past is the majority country that were represented there were Americans, you know, and intel officers, and for obvious reasons. They know the most about the programs and where to look. You know, so this wasn't a cooked system or a fixed system that we didn't control.
Some will speculate that they did not do it because they didn't, in the end, they thought Saddam would slip away one more time. And they wanted him gone. For whatever reason, multiple reasons. The purist would be they believed he was a threat and let's get rid of him. You know, but they wanted him gone and they thought he was a sly fox who's going to slip away from us one more time.
You know, Saddam...
Do you think there's any credibility to that idea?
Well, Saddam, he's a gangster. He's always tried to slip away. He's had 9 lives in the past. And
that's exactly what scared him. And so that's exactly why they wanted, you know, if he wasn't willing to capitulate himself and say, you know, I'm leaving the country, I'm giving up power, you can come in and go anything you want to do.
You have a gangster who is not a threat to us. And in order to take him down in this manner, it's going to cost you, let's just say at this point, 800 lives, 4,500 wounded, a military that's overstretched, going on $200 billion of our treasure, our reputation and image around the world in shatters, and we are to the point we are now where we've got a much longer road ahead. Was this worth the cost of taking down this tin-horn dictator? Now, people that make the case that, well...
With 700 and some lives and
798 as of today.
$250 billion or more.
Well, at this point, moving toward 200 billion,
right.
You know, but it will go. Okay. It will go higher, no doubt. I mean, to me,
was it worth it in your answer? Not in a day in the life.
Certainly not. Now he gassed his people. He gassed his neighbors. Yeah, he gassed.
He was as awful a dictator as there exists on the planet.
Absolutely. And he gassed Halabja in 1988. What did we do about it in 1988? He gassed the Iranians on the Iraq. We
did nothing about it because
we supported him.
Exactly.
You know, I mean,
and everybody in the Middle East doesn't forget that, and they tell you that at every. You know this. At every moment they would tell you about it.
Tell me about it.
Right?
Yes.
Probably a lot of them supported Iraq too because they fear Iran more than they hate Saddam. Right.
People, well, yeah. You mean in terms of public officials at the time in charge of the American government?
Iran is a 300-pound gorilla of the Persian Gulf.
Right. But, you know, if you choose a lesser evil to support, in your mind, then later on you can't become indignant about what happened during that time that you let
Correct.
go by.
Ethics raises its ugly head. Yeah.
I want to get onto this though. I mean, looking at what the president said last night, when she said what the plan was, not how to get there, so to speak. You know, mainly let's let the Iraqis on June 30th. We're handing over sovereignty to them. We want Brahimi to choose an interim government. We want to have an election. We want to see we believe that something will happen, something transformative will happen when we say we're not in control. On the other hand, this is what today from CNN, diplomats on Tuesday questioned how much power the U.S. will transfer to an interim Iraqi government on June 30th, as Russia suggested members of the new government should be chosen before the UN Security Council votes to endorse the scheduled handover. So there's still some great question on the part of some members of the Security Council that we're prepared to hand over sovereignty and that we may not want to still exercise some control. I don't know what the answer to that is. I think the Bush administration would say we want to give them their sovereignty because
I heard the president say full sovereignty. I mean, that actually surprised me. But the president of the United States said on June 30th, full sovereignty. And I think that for purposes of the Security Council wanting that as an end state, they heard the president say it.
So they should take the president's word for it. We're not trying to control the situation and pull all the strings behind. We've said to Brahimi, you choose.
Right.
We want to be consulted, but you choose. We have a vested interest here. Yes?
Yeah, and I think the key now is the acceptability of whoever Brahimi chooses or presents.
Acceptable to all the parties, the Iraqi parties on the ground, the Kurds and the Sunnis and the Shia and others, as you say, more than that.
Yeah.
What's likely to happen in your... Tell me what your best hope is. What's the best case and the worst case after June 30th?
The best case is that, first of all, we get a UN resolution. And then along with that, we get some countries willing under that UN resolution to help us out. It may not be the kinds of boots on the grounds we would really prefer, but any kind of assistance is worthwhile.
Let me interrupt that before. That's the best case in getting some troops to help us when the UN resolution passes. Joe Biden sort of has been saying for a long time that Chirac has told him that NATO troops might be prepared to go in there. Others have argued with Biden about that. Do you have any idea as to whether NATO could become, a force on the ground if America gives sovereignty to the Iraqis?
I think it's possible.
You do?
I do think. I think what the French and others are going to demand is obviously the resolution, the way they want it framed and shaped. They're going to want to say in the political reconstruction, and they're going to want some involvement in the economic decisions and economic reconstruction for obvious reasons out there. And the cost for that ought to be that they have to pony up. And NATO would be the ideal force to take the military component of this. The second thing that has to happen is Brahimi gets the kind of people that are broadly accepted. Now, I don't believe every single faction is going to buy into it, but the majority, the bulk of the Shia, the Kurds, and the Sunni need to buy into it. In the case of the Kurds, I think it's easy. It's Barzani and Talabani. The Sunnis are going to be a little bit more tricky. The Shias will be very tricky.
You got to choose those that weren't somehow implicated with respect to,
and we better
they could be Baath, but not.
We better get off pushing the exiles in there. Our boys, our lackeys that we brought in. We've already had problems.
Has anything that's happened to Chalabi surprised you?
Not at all.
He is what?
Take off the Neo from Khan, and you
Newsweek had it right. He's a con man.
Yes, I mean, look what's happening.
So how did he convince all these people to give him?
I think con men do, Charlie.
But he said what people wanted to hear.
$33 million worth.
$97 million in the Iraqi Liberation Act that was passed by Congress.
To his group,
to the INC. Yes, right. Yes. And so what so going back, I think Brahimi has got to hit the nail on the head and get us a broadly acceptable group for the interim government. Then the work begins, the roll-up-your-sleeve work to get ready for the elections in January. And I think what has to happen is we've got to make sure the Iraqi people, the Iraqi political parties, the system of government to be determined is settled within 6 months. That's a hell of a task, but if that works. Then let's go over to the security forces. We've picked a magnificent young general in Dave Petraeus to head up the training security forces.
Table, and it's probably as good as the military has.
We could not have done better. I would give Dave Petraeus all the resources he wants. How many training teams, camps, facilities, paychecks? Build me the finest Iraqi security force that will stand up to the threat. And what does it take and what do you need? And we need to make that commitment.
Pay them when it's necessary to pay them to
Absolutely.
get them to do the job.
Yeah, and train them and give them a sense of camaraderie and spirit.
The other NATO countries have said they wouldn't do that. They all would do that. The Germans
and countries in the region would do
that too.
And then the other part of this that has to be done, I would convene a convention of every Iraqi businessman that I can, ask maybe King Abdullah to host it in Amman, the Arabs to sponsor it, bring in foreign investors and say, what is it going to take to get your company back up on its feet, to start hiring people, to get your construction business going? What kind of foreign investment, what kind of donors, what kind of loans do you need? What kind of help do you need in rebuilding your infrastructure? Give them a job. Get West Virginia truck drivers out of those Halliburton trucks and put Iraqis in there. It's better for the American taxpayer, and it gives them a vested interest in making sure the truck gets through. I mean, we look like a bunch of people coming from the outside with contractors doing their business for them. I mean, there's a whole series of things like this that I think can work. You need plans. You need commitment to it. You need to work them all at the same level at the same time. And you need to think these things through in the end state. And you need to get international cooperation in developing these.
So the worst case is they don't do any of that. And what happens?
The worst case is that we don't get the UN resolution. So we are stuck now where we are now. We're going to take the security burden. We're not going to have an international imprimatur in what we do. We got to hope we can convince Brahimi to stick this out, and Kofi Annan, without a UN resolution, to try to at least get it through a political process. Worst case, the Brahimi situation, he does not come up by June 30th with an acceptable group, or we put one up there that there's major factional disagreement with that selection. So we have like a big chunk.
Nobody's happy and everybody's angry.
Well, let's say we have the Kurds in and part of the Sunni and none of the Shia or something like that, which is going to be really dysfunctional. That we don't get on a path to make the elections viable by January. The electorate's not ready for it. The political parties aren't developed. The form of government isn't settled into how it's going to be structured. That's worst case on the political side. On the security side, that Dave Petraeus doesn't get the resources he needs, that we continually field Iraqi security forces that can't deal with the threat, that aren't standing up to it, that we can't see a timeline when we're going to be able to turn it over to them. On the economic front, where every time a company tries to get started, it gets bombed, it gets beaten, it doesn't have the resources to start it up, the unemployment rate is so high that Iraqis are becoming discouraged and more angry. That's the worst side of this. Again, it's internationalization, political reconstruction, economic reconstruction, and security. The four major component parts that I heard the president say were needed to make this work. What the president, he has laid out the objectives, and I think very well.
And you agree with the objectives?
I agree with him.
He's laid it out well.
Yeah, I would just say nothing's new.
Yeah.
This is, but that's not a criticism. It's consistent. The president, I disagree again that the president has got to be the one that comes up with a plan. He lays out the goals. His administration, now the Pentagon, and I would hope by the 30th, thank God the Department of State would be in this, they owe him the path to make the best case happen, or close to it, in each of these areas.
Some will say that the worst case, I'm taking it beyond where you are, and Saud al-Faisal said this on this program, King Abdullah has said this, the worst case is some kind of civil war, and it blows up.
Here's what we have on the ground. This is not an Islamist unique conflict in terms of what the bad guys are trying to do. This is a classic Maoist insurgency. You begin by terrorist acts. You begin by showing that the authorities can't enforce and protect. You attack police stations. You attack oil facilities. And then all of a sudden you try to find elements in society that feel disenfranchised. Sunnis who feel victimized. De-Baathification is striking us. They're holding us responsible for Saddam. You get inside and you infiltrate. You create this sense of they're picking on you. You're the victim. We represent you. Those evil Shia, those evil Americans, those evil Kurds. We need to work with you. We're your protectors. Or you have those that get down into the Shia groups and said, you need your own militia. They're about to destroy your religion. They're going to secularize you and take you away. You need the army of God to be your militia. Now you're into the insurgency. You create insurgency groups. Eventually, you bring the insurgency to civil war. And who fights in the civil war? Whoever. Shia on Shia, Sistani versus Sadr, or Shia on Sunni, or the insurgents to create a civil war of those opposed to those supporting the United States and those trying to support the United States and moving forward to our objectives. But you generate the civil war eventually. Classic Mao doctrine.
It's Beirut all over again.
It's communist China, it's Vietnam, it's Beirut. I mean, the model is out there. It's a classic insurgency. We're about midway in this process. It has moved from the isolated terrorist acts that we had early on into a full insurgency now. And it is not quite to the Civil War point. I was surprised a couple times when assassinations and mosques were destroyed and political parties and the Kurds were hit that it wasn't the catalyst for a full civil war. Remarkable restraint
On the part of the Kurds.
On the part of the Kurds, on the part of the Shia in doing this. But how long can we hold that off? And again, I'm surprised. I really believe by July we would see civil war. And now I don't believe that's necessarily going to happen. And I do think it's the Iraqi people that are trying to keep a lid on this thing. But the insurgency have moved, I would say, frighteningly close to being able to generate that spark. And that's what we've got to prevent, because that's going to put us in the worst position, because then we're going to have to choose sides. Look at how we're dancing around the Fallujah and the Sadr issue, trying to resolve this with minimum violence, try to resolve this in a way that we don't have to go in and get into these confrontations. Well, what are we going to do if they go to war with each other? Get between them, pick a side, whose side? This is going to be extremely difficult for us and put our troops in a very bad position if insurgents are able to move it to that level. That's the biggest threat now. We can't let them get to that civil war.
And the most important thing you say is that it is still possible not to let them.
Yes.
And Petraeus is a good man to be there, and that...
Well, Petraeus is the absolute best choice for the development of the Iraqi security forces, but it's not just Iraqi security forces. This is diplomacy. This is political development, economic reform that's going to prevent this. In the end, what the president said is absolutely right. The Iraqi people are going to have to stand up. But we have got to give them the incentives, the direction, because there's nothing in their history that provides this for them. And they've been traumatized for as long as Saddam has been in power. So we are, as your term, creating something that wasn't there before. And it's going to take all the elements of power. It's not a military problem. And it's not just a diplomatic problem or an informational problem or an economic problem or a political problem. It's all of those combined.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Tom, for allowing me to engage General Tony Zinni, as we have on this program.
Pleasure as always, Charlie.
Thank you very much. This book, Tom Clancy with General Tony Zinni, retired, and Tony Colts, Battle Ready. It is his story. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have you on this broadcast, and I'm sure the audience agrees. Thank you for joining us for this hour. We'll see you tomorrow night.